My name is Hannah Jane Pritchett, current U of A GIST Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our hosts are Jennifer Mason and Chris Lukenbiel. Today, we will be talking with Nirav Merchant, Director of the UA Data Science Institute. Let's get started.
Hello, my name is Chris Lukenbiel. I'm the Director of the UA GIST programs. And today on our podcast, we have Nirav Merchant from the University of Arizona. He's the Director of the Data Science Institute. Nirav, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about what the Data Science Institute does, and also being one of the lead scientists for the University of Arizona related to CyVerse and Jetstream as co-PI. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that they have a spatial component? I know that you've been a long-term supporter of the GIST programs by having hired some of our students to work on your projects in the past and also taking on interns. So we do have a bit of a history, and I know that you're more of a open source sensor aspect focused scientist, and how that those relate to spatial data for our purposes. But so it seems like it's a very exciting field, and one that the president of the university is very supportive of with his focus on the fourth industrial revolution. But maybe we could start with telling us a little bit about some of the activity in the Data Science Institute generally, and then how some of the spatial aspects around CyVerse and Jetstream.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me, Chris. And we have been really fortunate to find good talent from the programs. And I've been really delighted to see how your program has evolved over the years and included a lot of open source components as part of the training, and even emphasis on Python, which is something that in data science is a very common language. So thank you for providing us the talent that we need in many capacities on our projects. So the Data Science Institute by itself is a very young entity. We are in our third year, but I've been at the U of A now 27 years. The need for data science is across the board. Just about every discipline needs it. And often people equate data science to just processing a lot of data. That's just science today. It's not data science. The beauty of data science is combining modalities of data that were virtually impossible to connect. Scale is one thing, maybe it's a lot of data, but then there are patterns in that data. There are different types of data. It could be images, it could be sound, but those sounds could be recorded on different parts of campus or the world. And there is a notion of spatial, whether it's spatial as in on Earth, or spatial on DNA and locations of genomes and genes and introns. So most scientists have that need. And so data science as an institute, we looked at what is it that our campus needs to connect the people that are doing work, building methods, building technologies, and then the subject matter experts that want to consume it. And when we bring them together, that's when data science really shines. And so the role of the Data Science Institute is to provide that fabric, that ecosystem, that when people come together and collaborate, they're often going to hit challenges, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's questions, it's algorithms, it's techniques. How do we quickly bring someone in from a different department that most likely you've never spoken to, and then help them help you in a way such that the question that you're asking is elegantly answered and can rise to the challenge of the science that you're trying to do. So Data Science Institute focuses a lot on something called HPUs, which is human-powered units, and not just CPU and GPU, which is what is a computing term. And I have to give credit for HPU to my colleague Stefan Kubarov in computer science, where every project, when you have the right HPUs, the CPUs and GPUs show up and they work correctly. But if you start a project based on CPU and GPU and you don't have the HPUs, your project doesn't achieve its full potential. So now I will talk a little bit about CyVerse. CyVerse is now in its 13th year. The project was born as iPlant and National Science Foundation, which funds us, and we are now at close to $115 million that they've invested in our project. The focus was data gathering, data acquisition, and NSF realized that they were funding a lot of data generation over the years, especially in the genomics area. And then 13 years ago, when teams had to collaborate with what is now called next generation sequencing data, they would ship each other hard drives. Now, when you start shipping hard drives to each other because your data is really hard to download and manage, if UPS and FedEx is part of your data management, most likely bad things will happen eventually. And hard drives get lost, or you change your data before the delivery of the hard drive happens, and you have to ship the next hard drive. So we were looking at things that were tripping science teams up. What is it that was preventing them from being productive? And we focused on building technology, but we didn't invent the technology. What we did is we went to communities that were already solving the problem. The astronomers knew how to do certain things. People in geosciences knew how to do certain things. Why should the biologists and plant scientists stand something up from grounds up? So we went to different groups, including the particle physics guys, and said, what can we take from your toolbox and then make it easier for biologists, and things that were not easy for the biologists, can we build the middleware that combines all of this and makes it usable? So over the years, we've built amazing technologies around data. And to give you a sense, CyVerse users, which are now close to 80,000 registered users, move about 7 petabytes of data through University of Arizona every year. And this is not large projects. These are small labs to medium-sized labs to even some large labs. So we've taken these ideas and made it easier for other groups to consume. For example, in hydrology, in astronomy, where they live in the same infrastructure. And another interesting fact to note is that NSF funds technology development. So we are funded by the Bio Directorate, but the computational side is SciSe, which is Computer Information Science and Engineering. They fund the best networks. So the University of Arizona sits on 100 gigabits per second. It's one of the fastest networks in the world. But then if you are going to use FTP to transfer a terabyte of data, it's going to take you a very, very long time. There are better ways of doing it. And so CyVerse, along with UITS that runs our campus infrastructure, have done a lot of tuning. We have created things like the Science DMZ, which allows data to move at that speed. And so we are able to achieve the movement of data to support the science goals. Now, bringing all of this full circle to geospatial, I did not imagine that this would happen in the duration of our project. But as field-based plant phenomics, which is people doing work in the field, started acquiring UAVs, drones, and you may know that the University of Arizona is home to the largest outdoor robot in the world in Maricopa, where day and night it's going up and down capturing data. But managing that data, processing that data, deriving insights from it takes a lot of work. And the core technology that allows it to be accurate is spatial, because you're now looking at that same plant over a whole season. And when you plant it, it's just dirt, and then it's growing and you're tracking it. And I'm talking of hundreds and thousands of plants in the field. And then you want to measure how much they're growing. So now you fly a drone, but you also have cameras going up and down on rails. So our users started showing up in our infrastructure with images, but they were GeoTIFF. And then they all would try to stitch them together or mosaic them, because now they want to calculate, measure things across multiple days. And you guys know it well enough, but if they're not corrected, these images automatically don't become a beautiful orthomosaic that you only see on TV. And to make that happen, we've worked on a lot of projects, especially with colleagues in computer science. And again, that goes back to how the Data Science Institute operates. When we saw that our colleagues in agriculture were struggling building these things because the images were not lining up, we worked with our colleagues in computer science, specifically computer vision, on methods to use deep learning techniques, use machine learning techniques to correct these and then move things forward. So that sort of is the relationship between Data Science Institute, CyVerse, and our campus. And the last thing I would say is with Jetstream, a big part of CyVerse was making the cloud easy for scientists. Amazon is, like going to Home Depot to make a piece of furniture. If you want a piece of furniture, if you are very well equipped to do carpentry and design things, you can go to Home Depot and get the components and make your furniture. But if you are someone like me and your interest is, I want the piece of furniture to do something else, my interest is not building the furniture, but is in having a party with the people sitting on that furniture. I want to get that chair right now. I shouldn't be going to Home Depot to get that chair. And so the same thing was happening in cloud, where people are told, oh, you want to do this analysis, go to the cloud. And the cloud is like, well, go to aisle 1, get your VM, go to aisle 2, get your firewall rules, go to aisle 3, get your IP address. And by the time the scientists reach aisle 3, they've given up on doing science because they're spending time doing plumbing. And so we wanted to take that out of the equation. And 12 years ago, we were inspired by Apple and the App Store. And people started downloading apps to their phones saying, I want to build a contact list. And they just got that, and that list did what they needed. And so we took the same thought process and created these app stores where you said, I would like to do ortho correction. And then you just pressed a button, everything else was done. You brought the data from the CyVerse data store and you ran what you had to. Well, that project is called Atmosphere, and it got so popular that we didn't have the bandwidth to support multiple disciplines. At the same time, my desire to run a lot of infrastructure, given what we were doing, was limited. So we collaborated with colleagues in Indiana and in Texas, and NSF invited us to write a new proposal to make this as a service for the science community in the US. And so that's how Jetstream was born. And I'm glad to say that just last week, Jetstream got renewed for Jetstream 2, which is the next 5 years. And we are going to focus on making artificial intelligence and AI methods for all. So we want to democratize these methods and techniques. So Jetstream 2 will have CPUs, GPUs, and the familiar Atmosphere interface, and the ability for our researchers to go use that with ease. And our emphasis is a lot on the long tail of science. And so this hopefully gives you a spectrum of starting at Data Science Institute and Jetstream. And the last thing I'll say is, with Jetstream, we have started looking at how do we make institutional regional clouds. So Arizona State University is our partner in Jetstream, and University of Hawaii, and their clouds will appear under the same system, and people will be able to connect into Jetstream, but suddenly their data is running in Hawaii or it's running at Arizona State. So we are building a community of people that are bringing in their institutional resources and lining them up.
So that actually leads into a question I have for you, talking about working in these interdisciplinary communities and the Data Science Institute kind of helping make things easier for users. I know that you have been helping with the test, trace, and treat team with the kind of campus reentry plan and COVID, and I think we'd love to hear more, what you guys are doing in the Data Science Institute and how you're kind of helping with the contact tracing and all of that, so that other people can be aware of what's going on campus.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. That is a very pertinent question as we look forward to the next semester in this pandemic era. The test Trace and Treat team, I've been very fortunate over the years to have collaborated with colleagues in public health, where the epidemiologists have been spending their time in pandemics that were outside the US, during Ebola, during Zika. And so I'd learned a lot from them, what works, what doesn't work. So when we were facing COVID-19, we all got together and decided we had to put something that was helpful to our community. So even before things got more challenging, we started a project called AZ COVID Text, which was funded by our VPR's office in RII. And that was to take the community-wide consensus on how they are doing in terms of health. And so knowing the health of the community in a privacy protected way, such that we know how many people are not feeling well, what is the disease condition they're encountering, more importantly, what are the challenges that they're facing, so we can help and plan. So if you now start seeing a certain zip code having challenges, and if they're going to show up at a hospital, can we have a 24-hour or a 48-hour heads up? Somebody is having challenges procuring food. Somebody needs help on the mental health level. How do we get them to go to the right volunteering services? And our focus was to make it easy. So there is already a spatial component, if you may, where we were trying to use zip codes. But then we also learned there are certain zip codes in Arizona that have fewer than 100 people. And just by getting that data and talking about it, you are no longer keeping it privacy preserved. But going back to the project, we launched that. And I think at this point, we have over 16,000 people that are Arizona based. They receive weekly updates. I don't know if any of you are enrolled in that project, but it's all text-based. We occasionally ask questions which about the household health. Those go into RedCap, which is run by our health sciences department under CB2, which is the Center for Biostatistics and Bioinformatics. And they have been phenomenal collaborators as well. And the reason I bring that up is at times like these, we have to collaborate with just about every department, every discipline on campus to come up with a solution that's meaningful and useful to our campus and our community. And now talking a little bit more about T3 effort that is under our provost to open our campus safely. The data platforms and communication team that I oversee, we are sort of the enabling team, because each of the T3 effort is producing some type of data that eventually ends up in a decision matrix for our campus. A simple question would be, how many people do we have on campus today? And that may seem like a very easy question, and we should have a very easy answer. But unfortunately, we don't have one entrance to our campus, and everybody doesn't swipe the CAD card to enter campus. We are a porous entity, and that's the beauty of what we do. But then there exist technologies that we can bring to bear to understand and answer such questions, whether it's our network traffic, it's the UA Wi-Fi traffic. And when you start looking at these things, the biggest thing that comes up is privacy, and how do we protect that? And I'm personally very cognizant of that, because often we create systems with a good intention to answer certain questions, but they always have unintended consequences that harm someone. And a big part about these techniques, especially from the AI, is do no harm. And understanding how to use this data without doing harm is difficult, but it has to be something that we put a lot of emphasis on. So as part of this effort, we've also set up a data governance committee that when there is institutional data that was nominally not used for decision making, So network traffic has nothing to do with student grades, or it doesn't have anything to do with faculty retention. All of those things need some level of oversight when we start using data that is people walking across campus, but because your phone is connected to Wi-Fi data, we know where you were for the last whole year. And how is that information to be used to help open the campus in a safe manner? Well, you use that data to assist the contact tracing, which is the manual contact tracing group, where anytime a communicable disease is reported by any testing, and that means any disease, the Pima County Health Department for us assigns a human being whose job is to get in touch with people and say, hey, you are suffering from this, you may have exposed other people. How can we let them know to go get checked, or in case of COVID, maybe undergo isolation? Now that data, when I talk to you or someone as a human being and ask you, what did you do for the last week? Well, in our current times, it's easy to answer that question. But if we think of it pre-COVID, all of us are running around doing a million things. You will forget at least 50% of the places you went to in the last week. And that is where we can show you the journey of how you spent time on campus. And then you can say, yes, I was in the student union for 2 hours. Chris and I had coffee. We sat next to each other. And according to CDC guidelines, if you spend that much time in this much distance proximity, that person should be aware and should be monitoring their health more closely, things along those lines. And so how do we take the spatial aspect of that data, make it available to the contact tracing group in a HIPAA, which is sort of the standard we have to follow, compliant manner, meeting all the requirements. And this tool never existed for them. So this is new. And so that's the kind of things that we are focusing on, is how do we help our campus safely consume data, but make sure it's in the right hands, more importantly, for the right purpose. Likewise, we are looking to use some of that spatial information in showing traffic in a room or in a building, how busy is this building? How many people are in the building? And can we make it where if you're looking at the building, it says, it's too crowded right now to follow the safe distancing guideline. Maybe you should enter in 5 minutes, and it can alert you and say, yes, please go ahead and enter the building. These are the kind of questions we are trying to answer. They may sound researchy, but they're very pragmatic. So at one end, we are looking at those things.
So are you looking at a specific data platform to use or a specific API to use? Or are you developing one internally or helping to get together with a group externally that's already been developed?
Very good question. That's an excellent question.
And then kind of getting the second question would be like the spatial component of, how would that work on the U of A campus as well?
That's an excellent question, Chris. We are the work that we are doing is led by Sudha Ram in MIS, Jeremy Frumpkin in UITS, and myself. The heavy lifting is coming from our amazing information security office. They had built this unbelievable system for security purposes. It's called Splunk, and Splunk is a commercial vendor that does consolidation of log data. So we have over 10,000 access points on our campus for Wi-Fi. And they are in different buildings. There's a building number and there's a location. So when you walk across campus and look up, you see this white box attached to the ceiling with green lights and saying Cisco. That's what our campus uses. Where each of those within 5 seconds sends the data to the Splunk system. And then it's mainly used to point out somebody having a device that's already compromised or hacked or launching attacks. So it was meant to keep our campus safe, and it has kept our campus safe. The ability to say that Chris's phone is connected to this Wi-Fi or Chris's laptop is connected to this Wi-Fi in the library on the second floor, and now Chris has moved the laptop and gone back to his office and opened it. This sort of gives you that journey, and there's a timestamp and a location. The location not being GPS accurate, and it cannot be used for something that is positionally accurate, because some of the network devices could attach to a Wi-Fi access point 2 floors down because they're using a new standard, and the one that you are at is very busy. The one that's 2 floors down only has one person connected, so you may connect to that one. So such things prevent it from it being GPS type of resolution. So we are relying on Splunk, and Paul Reeves, the senior security engineer, has been helping how to get that safely. And so Ilya Smith, who is our chief privacy and compliance officer, is leading a group where these questions and requests are proposed to them. They vet it and say, okay, if this data has to be provided, the identity of the person is stripped out, their even device MAC address is stripped out. So there's no way for somebody to be identified as a specific person when we are doing summary for how many people are on campus, how many people are in a building. But when the contact tracing people come and say, we need to alert Chris about this, Chris should be able to log in with his net ID, verify everything. And so at that point, the net ID should be visible to that activity. And to do that, there are lots of safeguards that we are putting in. So for that, we are creating the APIs and the methods. There isn't a singular platform right now, but maybe it will show up. Splunk has produced something that is to be released in about 2 weeks. And my understanding is our campus will get that. But those are very simple heat maps. I shouldn't use the word simple. They're fairly complex, but made beautifully elegant and simple for people to see it. But then they don't serve many of the purposes that we want to. So we are standing up things that are helpful for our campus and currently don't exist in the open source world. And as you would imagine, everything we are doing is completely transparent and open and is on GitHub, and anybody who wants to participate can look at it and adopt it.
I have a question that I just thought of too. So, if you're using UA Wi-Fi, I actually don't even know if I'm logged in on my phone when I go on campus, and so I'd like to hear if the team has thought about, some of these issues or gaps, for people perhaps who aren't logged into UA Wi-Fi on mobile devices, or what happens when students, faculty, and so on go off campus. Is that something that the team has thought about, other than I think you talked about like the text entry, and your thoughts on dealing with some of these kind of gaps or issues that you're going to come across in the data and tracking?
Again, an excellent question, Jennifer. The first part of that answer is when we did, and which should happen in any data science project, is data quality assessment. Turns out about 83% of our student population and about 80 to 82% of our faculty and staff utilize UA Wi-Fi. Now, you may not attach to that using your phone, but do you use your laptop, Jennifer? And that laptop connects to UA Wi-Fi. And you may take it to class, you may take it to another meeting room. So there is some digital fingerprint that you're leaving. The ability to go beyond campus is challenging, and at the same time something that we have to ask the question, how accurate will it be, and why are we doing it? And that data is not going to be visible to us, but this is sort of a good segue into, again, a project that is under Joyce Schroeder and the team that's handling contact tracing. They are working using the Google and Apple API, which is privacy preserving at the most foundational level. And to simplify it, all I would say is it should not be looked as a contact tracing app, but it's an exposure notification system. And I really want to stress that, because the word contact tracing means we are going to trace you and contact you. This thing cannot do either. So what this does is you use Bluetooth low energy systems, which are on most modern smartphones. And it keeps a track of who's around you in terms of using the Bluetooth. It's almost like a MAC address, as in it's a unique number only available to that phone on the Bluetooth signal. And that's true for Wi-Fi and everything else. And so that is something when I'm walking by you, if I just walk by you, there's no worries. But if I sat next to you, how close am I sitting next to you? How long did I sit next to you? And so now it records the MAC from your phone and says, I was sitting next to you. At the same time, your phone also is doing. So it's almost like bookkeeping. Now you can imagine hundreds of people sitting together, walking around, and there is a duration of time where, according to CDC and all the different standards of what is considered a risk factor. And so there is a number between 0 to 8. And if I start feeling ill, I go get a test and I am COVID positive, my physician or the testing place will give me a number, like a code. And I put that code into my phone. And then everybody who had come, who was exposed to me between the scale of 0 to 8, gets an alert saying that someone, they don't know it's me, tested and was positive, and you may have been exposed to this. So that's where the exposure notification part comes in, and they get notified. And there is no way to know who the people are, when they were next to each other. It's very much driven by the fact that you cannot decode any of this. So the hope would be, the UFA is right now doing early testing on it. And if it meets our safety, security, and accuracy requirements, then we would start using it. And I think our president and others will be announcing it fairly soon. So that sort of gives us a little bit of window into things outside of campus and on campus using these exposure notification technologies.
Have you worked with the Bluetooth technologies for the spatial aspect before? When you're talking about the privacy, I believe it's referencing the TCN protocols as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. So these are...
And then why, sort of to follow with that, we can start with TCN and privacy. You can help us understand that. But like, why is Bluetooth possibly better than GPS in this context for a spatial understanding?
Yeah. So, to keep it brief, I would say two main things. First is we spend a lot of time indoors, and GPS indoors is fairly challenging, as you would well know. We can augment it, but the accuracy is difficult. The second part is the most important part, which is energy consumption. And Bluetooth low energy is meant to be something that your phone is not draining your battery, when it's trying to see who's around you. That constant scanning will take up a lot of your battery time, and that makes it not very desirable for you to have it. And so you may not install it, you may not use it. And if we don't have a good adoption rate, and you guys may know the fact that there is a lot of fatigue to installing apps. There are just way too many apps. And so if people are not adopting it, then it's going to be difficult to make it a useful system for exposure notification.
What about the TCN protocol technology? Is that something that's considered for this project as well?
Yes. So the group that we are collaborating with is called COVID Watch, who's our partner in this. It's a nonprofit. Interestingly enough, it has roots with University of Arizona. The executive director, Christina White, used to be a undergraduate engineering student at University of Arizona. And then she moved to Stanford for her PhD, where she is right now. And she's been working on creating this along with a global community of people. And so they are using these protocols that are derivatives of each other. Some of them, there were different groups that came up with privacy-preserving protocols, some at University of Waterloo, some in Germany and Switzerland, and they all had different variations. And then when Google and Apple API became the norm, and to give you a little bit more background, you will see dozens of quote-unquote contact tracing apps for mobile. They all have their own security and privacy concerns. Many of them use GPS. But we all know if you can gather that data, you can identify the person very easily. And so people quickly decided that they had to rely on Apple and Google to enforce some of the use of their API. And to use that API, you have to be able to follow some of these privacy-preserving techniques and protocols that are used, TCN being one of the primary ones, Chris, that handle encryption at a different level, the way they keep the data locally, so there is no sort of central place where some of these things happen. There is a central sort of notification system that is run, but all of this is very much in the hands of the user. So yes, the protocols are key, and subscribing to open source protocols where everybody can test, look at it, and comment if they see concerns is important. Otherwise, a black box protocol would be really hard and would be difficult to defend.
So one of the questions that I always like to ask, just because we anticipate having a lot of students watching these podcasts, slightly off track, but Chris mentioned before that you've hired GIST alumni, and I'm just kind of wondering, as students get into these kind of GIS or data science fields, what are the skills that you think are really essential for them to succeed going out into the workforce professionally or in research and academia? And, I just wanted to hear your opinion, when you give advice on skills that students should really focus on.
Absolutely. So the first thing I look for any student for that matter, is the appetite and hunger for innovation and learning. If you exhibit that, I know everything else will follow. If you are diligent, you are organized. I personally am myself not very organized, but if you have the desire to constantly learn, keep up with things, read up, and go into depths of things, not read a blog and say, I'm an expert on this or I know it, but get your hands dirty, learn about it, see how it's applied, go talk to people, learn to collaborate. These are sort of the attributes that I look for even in students and even in faculty. So These are the kind of collaborators that always make life so much fun and projects enjoyable. What I specifically look for in students, especially from the GIST program, is their ability to have a solid foundation in spatial analytics. When you start asking questions, they have the computational thinking of how will I get this data? How will I abstract a solution? How will I scale what I need to? And even though they may not know how to, but their thinking process is aligned to it, I don't care if they know ArcGIS and they don't know other open source platforms. Each platform has value, and if you know how to answer the science question, the platform suddenly becomes not very material. You know how to go and use it and get your questions answered. So what I look for in the GIST students is their ability to not be afraid of diving deep into the underlying question, learning about the technical capabilities, exploring multiple solutions, especially the ones that they are not aware of, and then work with a team of people to fill in the gaps where they find the gaps, learn something by themselves, go to Stack Overflow and find an answer to a question, harass somebody in the math department and get an answer, read up papers that may seem way outside their expertise, but yet harass somebody and say, I don't know this part, can you explain that to me? And then the last thing I look for is their ability to use good project management tools. They should be able to work in GitHub. They should be able to, or any version control software, how to organize their projects using, Trello or some Kanban board, which again is available in Git, and then be able to communicate their progress through either short updates and wiki updates or write a blog. That to me is the student that can pretty much tackle anything. But for the GIST side, I would also like them to be aware of what can they do with Google Earth Engine, what can they do with Planet Lab data, where can I find this from a NASA archive? And so that hunger and desire to get the data, align the computation method, and solve a question and distribute their knowledge and expertise and be open about it is something I always look for.
Thank you for that, Nirav, and that's very informative for our students to understand. And as you might know, we now have a open source GIS class that ends their studies in the MS GIST. And currently our adjunct faculty for that is Dr. Aaron Olson, who works for Planet as well right now. So they're learning some of these skills, and they have actually worked with CyVerse in one of the classes to actually be able to learn some of the tools. So we thank you for your support in that manner as well. But I wanted to get back for a minute to the contact tracing questions on campus, and thinking analytically for me, I sort of had three questions. One was sort of like, and I know you don't know the answers completely, but like possibly the timeline of the thoughts going on with the community on getting students involved, being able to start collecting and doing the data, building the data universe for deployment. Is there going to be a requirement that everybody has to have Bluetooth on when they're on campus? And more sort of like the universe size, that you need a large N size to make this work. And so not just on campus, but are there other potential collaborators that the university is looking at, like the city or the county or the state or other Arizona State or NAU, like to increase the universe size to make it more a robust system. So timeline, Bluetooth requirement, which I could see some students going, wait, you're going to drain my phone? Nirav might not like this. And then universe size.
So I'll actually answer it in out of sequence, but universe size, I'll answer it first. So this effort is meant to be statewide. The only way Google and Apple will let you use this system, the APIs that they have for the Bluetooth low energy, is that the health department and the governor sign off on it. And so for the pilot, we are a partnership with ASU and AU. And the reason this is done is all of these have health consequences, and you have to be able to follow up on those. So when you get the notification, and again, I'm sort of going back to calling them exposure notification systems because that's what they are. So when you get the notification, there is an action to be taken, which might be call this phone number, and that may end up in the health department for the state of Arizona. And so the universe has to be fairly large. We are very mobile, and we just don't travel across the state of Arizona. We go way far away. And so at some level, it has to be regional, national, global, to be really effective. But then if you look at the percentage of population that travels extensively, they're not the bulk of the population, but if they are the ones that are bringing things back and forth, there are a lot of complications. And I think it is a deeper epidemiology conversation to be had on the risk factors that go with it when it comes to spreading. But short answer to your question, the studies have gone anywhere from 30% to 60% being the sweet spot of number of people using it who are closely interacting with each other. There is value. So even though the whole world may not adopt it, but if Pima County and the state of Arizona, University of Arizona, we all adopt it, it would be, there will be value to this system. It also has to be complemented by testing. If all of us have it and nobody gets tested, nobody's ever going to be notified. And so these things go hand in hand, and it's an ecosystem. It's not by having an exposure notification application, we've solved the COVID problem. This is just one small piece of technology that we have to diligently utilize among many other things to mitigate and manage the disease spread. The question that you asked about, is it required by everyone to turn Bluetooth on? No, it's none of these things will be successful if people are forced to do it. It is something that you have to convince and explain and show the value, the privacy, and the efficacy of it. And when people see value, that's when they're going to adopt it. But if you issue an edict, it's not going to happen. We also have to be very cognizant that not everybody has access to a smartphone. When we talk of our campus, maybe bulk of our population, but this is an issue that is our whole community, our whole state. There are families that may have no phone or one phone that they share. How are we going to help them? So we have to think of the whole community and how do we help each of them. So when you think of exposure notification systems, manual contact tracing, the testing infrastructure, all of this has to work in unison to help each other, to help us stay safe and prevent the spread. So hopefully that answers your question. And in terms of time frame, we are hoping that the application, the COVID Watch application, is available to our students when they come in fall semester. Right now, we are in what is early beta. Once all of that comes through, we'll be making an announcement, and it would be a visible application in the Play Store and iTunes and others.
Well, thank you, Nirav, for joining us today on the UA-GIST podcast and sharing your information about the Data Science Institute and the Institute's and your efforts with contract tracing at the university, which we're very appreciative of, and spending some time talking about the spatial aspects of that, and as well what students should be thinking about doing. I think this is a real exciting time for students to be entering in the data science field. I do have one question for you, and maybe you know the myth, or if it's even considered a myth, but oftentimes people in the GIS world will say that 80% of all data begins with spatial data. Do you believe that is a true statement, or have you heard this comment before?
I haven't heard this comment before, but even though I'm not fully qualified to make that judgment on the 80%, I would be willing to bet that bulk of the data has some spatial connection. And as I said, everything from DNA, it may not be the same coordinate system, but there is a relationship to a place. And very often our data is collected with that purpose.
Yeah, and I think that that's the important thing when we think of the GIST programs, is that the spatial aspects of data, that it's not just another field or column, but there is some sort of an underlying ontological characteristic to data, and then that's one component of it, I would say. But anyway, completely off the mark for a conclusion for me. That's a coffee conversation for you and I, Nirav, some other day. But again, thank you, Nirav, for joining us. I know you're a very busy person, and it's lovely to see you. And once things clear up again, we will have you over and have a cup of coffee or a lunch with Jenny and I.
Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing, what rolls out in the fall and all the work that you've been working very hard on, I'm sure, this spring and summer. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, all of you. And I look forward to our conversations very soon. So thank you.
All right, take care, Nirav. Thanks for your help.
Sure, bye.